Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shlomo, for the sponsorship. And it's nice to see everyone here once again this morning. And I've still got Purim and Megillas Esther in the brain. And I'd like to sort of assume that everyone here also has had a Purim which was meaningful and enjoyable. And as Shirley mentioned before, slightly moving a bit back to normal life. Not quite there yet, but at least a move in the right direction. So these shiurim that I'm giving at the moment are really highlighting Sefer Bereshis. And I'd like to, the general theme of these shiurim is to see in what way Chazal saw in Sefer Bereshis, they saw the garin, if you like, the seeds of the whole of future Jewish history. In other words, everything that will unfold in the life of Klal Yisrael is rooted in Sefer Bereshis. And learning Sefer Bereshis properly gives us a more of a biblical perspective on life, on Jewish life, on Jewish history, and gives us very firm sort of principles and ideas. For example, the primary example possibly for many of us here is the primacy of the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and the concept that Eretz Yisrael was given to the Jewish people and is connected intrinsically to the Jewish people at the very deepest level. That is one of the key ideas of Sefer Bereshis, right? We get Avraham Avinu is given a bris milah, and that bris milah seals the covenant between Avram and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the bris milah itself was given on the understanding that Avram would reside in the land of Israel and transform really Eretz Canaan into Eretz Yisrael. And he himself isn't zeicha to do it completely, but he makes the first move by acquiring Ma'aras HaMachpelah and Hebron. That was the first Daled Amos really of the land of Canaan, which was transformed into Eretz Yisrael. And that connection between Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael is really rooted in the book of Bereshis, and the whole idea of the Ovos and the Imohos and the Shvatim, all our basic vocabulary for understanding Jewish life properly comes from Sefer Bereshis. So with that in mind, I'd like to have a bit of a closer look at some of the ideas surrounding Megillas Esther and Amalek, and to show you some of the origins of Amalek seen through the eyes of Chazal in Sefer Bereshis. Let's have a look. Let's see if I can do my screen share. See if we can get some text up here. No. 1 second, bear with me for 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. I need to... second. Okay, let's get this going. Okay, can you see a text? Yes? Excellent. So you can see the topic here of this particular sheet is Aesop, Amalek, and Megillas Esther in Sefer Bereshis. So where do we see the roots of the idea of Amalek and even the birth of Amalek? So here in Parshas Vayishlach, so I've entitled this The Origins of Amalek and His Antidote. And there are some very, in a sense, the drama played out in Megillas Esther between Mordechai and Haman is in some sense a replay of earlier dramas that were played out between Klal Yisrael and the antithesis of Klal Yisrael. If Klal Yisrael are considered to be a people who are founded on the idea of Kedusha and of the Am Hashem, so Amalek is the anti-Kedusha and the anti-Am Hashem. How did this come to be? So let's go back and have a look at some of the biblical history of Amalek as seen through the eyes of some Chazal. So let's have a couple of psukim in Vayishlach. Vayeshev Aesop be'eretz Seir, Aesop hu Edom. Okay, so we are familiar with Aesop, the brother of Yaakov, and their hostility of Aesop towards Yaakov, and the various, all the different events that happened between Yaakov and Aesop. Aesop wasn't just his brother, it was his twin brother. But nevertheless, the Aesop and Yaakov are seen as in a sense, the antithesis to each other. Let's take this a bit further. Va'ele told us Aesop Avi Edom B'Haseya, and who were the descendants of Aesop. So we first get Va'ele Shemos B'nei Aesop, Eliphaz. Okay, so this is Eliphaz. We've met Eliphaz before. We've mentioned him before. Eliphaz is the first son of Aesop, and he's the son Ben Odo, Ashes, Aesop, etc., etc. Okay, fine. And then Eliphaz has the posuk here tells us about 5 sons of Eliphaz: Taman, Omar, Tzafo, Gatam, and Kenaz. These are his 5 sons. So far, so good, right? These were just generally the descendants of Aesop. And then we come to a very interesting little posuk, which at first sight, we're a bit baffled by its relevance and why the Torah would go out of its way to mention it. And the pasuk says as follows: the Timnah. So there was a woman called Timnah. Okay, and who was she? She hoiso Pilegesh le'Eliphaz ben Aesop. So she was, the translation here is a concubine, right? A Pilegesh. So just a couple of words about the Pilegesh. The Pilegesh in the ancient world, you have to understand, we're living in a polygamous society where men had multiple wives, something which we find pretty incomprehensible. But that's a society on a different planet, really. The polygamous system. But within the polygamous system, it was quite clear that the wives that a person had, some of them were official wives, and some of them were married but not married. They were his wives, but they were sort of halfway between a wife and a servant. In other words, the Pilegesh, a concubine, meaning that they weren't officially married, and because they weren't officially married, the children born by the concubine were not officially children of the man. They were not going to inherit. They weren't going to be considered the continuation of the paternal line. And the relationship is very difficult for us. We have nothing in our society. We have no vocabulary really to describe this relationship in our society, because it doesn't exist at all. But you have to somehow but this was quite an important type of relationship in the ancient world, not at all uncommon. And particularly kings and leaders and princes had wives and had concubines, and the concubines were committed to them and for all intents and purposes married to them, but not officially. Okay, why is that important? So let's have a look here. Let's have a look at this again. Right? So Timnah, this woman Timnah, she was the Pilegesh of Eliphaz. Okay, so Eliphaz is Aesop's first son, and he has a wife from whom he has 5 legitimate sons, grandsons of Aesop. But then he also has, in addition to his wife, he has a Pilegesh, and she vateled leEliphaz es Amalek. And Amalek is born as the son of a concubine of Eliphaz. And this piece of information seems really to be on a pshat level, seems to be irrelevant. Why are we interested to know? We're not even particularly interested to know about Eliphaz himself, but why would we be interested to know in his concubines and his wives and the son that he had from the concubine? But this is recorded in the Torah, and the assumption is that if it's recorded in the Torah, it has a significance. Right? So let's have a look at Rashi. Rashi gives us a little bit of a taste of an idea of what Chazal say, but we're going to have a look at the origins of Rashi in a moment. But let's first have a look at Rashi. Always a good place to start. The Timna Hoysa Pilegesh, right? Timna Hoysa Pilegesh. So and Rashi has, in general, when we learn Rashi, both on the Chumash and in the Gemara, you have to try. The best way to learn Rashi is that Rashi's answering a question which he doesn't articulate. In other words, Rashi often gives us the answer without giving us the question. This is an old Jewish custom. We find this in the Gemara as well. The Gemara very often, the structure of the logic in the Gemara very often is we start off with the answer, and then we work backwards. If this is the answer, what was the question, right? My kosovar or my kamashmala? Like, what did you think beforehand? So Rashi wants to know, Rashi is looking at the question, why are we at all interested in the name of the Pilegesh of Eliphaz? Seems to be something irrelevant. Says Rashi, and we'll see in a minute, he's based himself on a Gemara, Lahodia Geduloso Shel Avram. Somehow here in the story of Timna and Amalek, there is a reference to the status of Avram Avinu, Kama hoyu ta'evim ledabek pazaro, that there were many individuals who very much were ta'evim. They were strongly desired ledabek pazaro, to marry into his family. How do we know that? Timna bas alufim hoysa. We know that Timna was actually a bat alufim. In other words, she was a princess. In her society, she came from a different culture, but in her culture, she was the daughter of a king, right? Shenema v'achos Loton Timna. That Timna was the sister of Loton, and who was Loton? Says Rashi, "V'Loton me alfa yoshri seyehoyo min achorim sheyoshe bo lefonim." In other words, there was a nation called the Chorim, and the Chorim were the ancient residents, like the Hittites and the Canaanites. The Chorim were also one of the ancient civilizations, and in that civilization, Loton was a prince, and he had a sister called Timna, right? For some reason, which we're not told of here, she wanted to join the family of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu's family was considered to be, this is Rashi's point here is, as he starts off at the beginning, Gedulosa lahodia Gedulosa shel Avram Avinu, to give us a taste of how great was the status of Avram and his family, that here a princess from a pagan culture, she very much wanted, more than anything else, she wanted to marry into the family of Avram Avinu. And so it says, Omra, she said, Eini zochele nose lecha. Clearly, I'm not going to be able to marry you properly. Halavai ve'eye pilegesh. So what's Rashi saying here? Halavai ve'eye pilegesh means she as a princess, the last thing in the world that is suitable for a princess is to become a pilegesh. A pilegesh was very much a second-rate citizen. Why did she agree? So Rashi's trying to look at a bit of a surprising feature of this whole story. Why would a princess agree to be a concubine of a second-rate nature to someone like Eliphaz? So Rashi's saying it's got to do with the fact that she wanted somehow to connect to the family of Avram Avinu, and she was unable, for reasons we don't know, to really get into the family of Avram Avinu. And so what she does is she finds, at least Eliphaz, right? Eliphaz being a son of Aesop, a grandson, right, of Yitzchak, a great-grandson of Avram Avinu. So he is going to be, at least to be a concubine of Eliphaz is more precious to her than to be a princess in her own culture. So there's something very interesting going on here. And Chazal understood that there is a whole drama taking place behind the scenes. One of the beautiful things about learning Medrash and learning the Gemara often gives us what you might call sort of the backstory behind the front story. In other words, the text of the Chumash that we all learn and read is the straightforward story, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. Behind that, there are lots of other stories going on, and these stories were part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. They were part of the Masorah. Chazal had handed down to them lots of other additional information, way beyond the actual text of the Chumash, and this is one such example. And it's important for us because it gives us a little bit of an insight into the origins of Amalek and the origins of the extreme hostility and hatred that Amalek had for the Jewish people. So Amalek turns out to be the son of a woman who really sacrificed her status as a princess in order to join into the family of Avraham Avinu, and she ended up a concubine of Eliphaz. Let's have a look at what Chazal say about this. So this Rashi actually is based on this Gemara. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Tzadi Tes. If any of you are interested in this topic, it's a Gemara worth looking up. We haven't got time to deal with it in great detail, but I want to share it with you because you'll see there's some interesting themes here. Incidentally, I just want to also mention to you, which I'll show you a bit more in a minute, that I had the zechus in my life to be a talmid of Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva in the 1970s. When I was in the Mir Yeshiva for several years, and I was in the Mir Yeshiva from about 71 till 75 in Yerushalayim. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he was one of the most remarkable Gedolim of the Litvak community in the world, right? He came from the Mir Yeshiva in Lithuania, and he was the leader of the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and was one of the most remarkable Magidei Shiurim I've ever heard in my life. I mean, he had absolutely every word and every idea in the Torah and in Chazal crystal clear in his mind, and he was one of the Gaonei Olam at a most remarkable level. What was interesting was, in addition to giving what he really loved, which was his shiurim in Gemara, he also gave a weekly shmooze. He gave a weekly Musa shmooze. I think generally in the community, he's probably more well known for his Musa shmoozin than for his Gemara shiurim. He would laugh if he knew that to be true today, I must be honest with you, because for him, the Musa shmooz that he gave was something that he gave because no one else was there to give it, and they wanted him to give it, so he gave them a Musa shmooz, but that wasn't really what he was interested in. He was interested in his Shas and Rishonim, and his Gemara, which he learned and taught around the clock. And sometimes you had the feeling when you sat in a shir of his, you had a feeling sometimes you were like hearing Torah Messinai, like he was like really giving Torah on a very, very deep and profound level, truly a remarkable experience, something which changed my life, and I'll never forget it. Anyhow, so he once gave a Musa shmooze about this Gemara that we're about to learn now. And you'll see in a minute what he extracted from this piece of Gemara. Very, very interesting, and it's connected to the whole Amalek theme and the Amalek concept, and therefore through to Megillas Esther and subsequent confrontation with Amalek. So the Gemara asks as follows: Achos Loton Timna. Again, there's a pasuk which says that there was this man Lotan, a prince of the Chorim, and he had a sister called Timna. So the Gemara asks, Maihi. Maihi is a question. Basically, the Gemara asks, literally, why do we need to know this? Right? You can follow in the English if you like. What is the significance? Why is that an important piece of information that the Torah needs to write for us? So the Gemara answers, Timna bas Malachim have. She was a princess, right? And what happened? So here's the story. This is a story which is not in the Chumash, but in the Maseira of Chazal. Boi, Gemara here says, Boye li'igure. She wanted to be misgaya. She wanted to convert. And this is a very interesting story about conversion. And I think everybody knows that the whole topic of conversion is one of the hottest and most complicated issues today, and has always been a very complicated issue about people who wish to convert, and are we open to accepting converts, or are we hesitant to accept converts? Do we encourage people to convert? Do we discourage them to convert? How do we make this judgment? Right. This is one of the incidentally sort of the. I have a few colleagues here in Eretz Yisrael who are Diyanim, who sit on the Bezdin in various different towns. A few different people who I've known over the years, I was in yeshiva with, who are Diyanim, and without exception, if you ask them what is the biggest nightmare of Diyanim in Israel today, more than anything else, right? So you think, well, maybe it's kashrus, maybe it's monetary affairs, maybe it's gittim. The biggest nightmare is conversion. Geirus. How does one deal with Geirus in an ethical and spiritual and halachic way, in the best way possible? Who does one convert? Who does one not convert? How does one apply the laws of Geirus in the 21st century is the biggest issue, hottest issue out, right? And what is an Orthodox conversion? What is a non-Orthodox conversion, right? What is a legitimate conversion? What are you showing me, Elian? Elian's showing me something. I can't quite read it. Do you want to? You're muted, Elian. You're muted. I can't hear you speak.
Sorry. Non-Orthodox conversion performed in Israel to be recognized for citizenship.
Yes. Okay, that has been. Is that on today's newspaper?
Yes.
Okay, so fresh off the press, courtesy of Elian Volgamut. Fresh off the press is the decision, the lunatic decision by the Supreme Court to accept non-Orthodox conversions as legitimate for the law of return, for people to be accepted for citizenship, right? So what that means then is, but the truth is this has been the case for forever, right? Because Israel has a built-in problem in the whole nature of Medinat Israel, which is it wants to be also a Jewish state and a democratic state, and that works like 60% of the time, but sometimes the two things are simply incompatible. Basically, the idea here is that if you're Jewish, then the law of return, you get citizenship. You just have to arrive at the airport, and you have a right to Israeli citizenship. But who is Jewish and who isn't Jewish? That is one of the biggest problematic issues in Israel, and has been from the very beginning. But it gets more and more acute, and as the lobbying pressure of reform and conservative Jews in America increases, so they have managed now to convince the Supreme Court that it's unethical for them to refuse non-Orthodox conversions. What that means is there are already lots of people running around in Israel with Jewish names, with an Israeli passport, with Israeli citizenship, who are halachically not Jewish. That is the situation, and everybody knows that. So one has to be a little bit aware of it. When you meet people, or if your son or grandson comes back with a girl he's met somewhere and she's got a nice Jewish name, it's always worth doing a little bit of a research to find out, are these people actually halachically Jewish or not? If they're not, then it's an issue. You need to try and find some way to go through a proper conversion. I can't resist telling you a little tiny anecdote that I had in a hotel myself about 15 years ago, I think it was. I was in a hotel around the time of year where it had been very hot, and suddenly the weather changed to be cold, right? It was the beginning of the winter. October sometime, I think it was. And I was in a hotel in Herzliya, I think it was. And because it was very hot, we had the air conditioning on in the bedroom. And then it turned very cold. So Shabbos morning, the air conditioning was on, and it was very cold. So I wanted to find a non-Jew to ask sort of indirectly, does he know how to work this air conditioner? So I went out into the corridor, and I saw a woman cleaning woman in the hotel. So I was going to ask her, could she help me with this? And suddenly occurred to me, is she Jewish or is she not Jewish? I didn't know. So I asked her, I wished her good morning, and I said, tell me, are you Jewish? So she put down all her cleaning materials, and she said, it's funny you should ask me that, she says to me, because some people say I am, and some people say I'm not. And she proceeded to give me a whole drasha about how half the people in Israel think she's not Jewish, and the other half think she's not Jewish. She's paid taxes here, kids go to the army and everything. And she starts giving me this whole heartfelt thing. And halfway through, she catches up and she says, wait a minute, why are you asking me this question? She says, I know what it is. It's the air conditioning. She said, and then she turns around and says, Ahmed, we need you. We need some help here for the air conditioning. Anyhow, what happened is that the Russians, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Russians, are left high and dry. Are they Jewish or are they not Jewish? And every Bezdin on a one-to-one basis makes a decision on a one-to-one basis to convert or not to convert, or how to convert and where to convert. It's a real issue. So this Gemara actually is one of the earliest sources of a convert, somebody who wanted to convert and wasn't accepted. This is an interesting piece of Gemara, and what were the consequences? So the Gemara says, Boili Gure, she wanted to convert. Basa etel Avram Yitzchak Yaakov v'lo kibluha. So she went to Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov, and they didn't accept her as a Gia. We're not told why they didn't. We're not told why not, but she wanted to become part of the followers. So what happened? What does the Gemara say? Holcha, she went, v'hoisa pilegesh la'elifov ben Aesop. She then decided, she eventually became the concubine of Eliphaz, right? The grandson of Aesop, the great-grandson of Yitzchak. Omra, why was that? So here's the bit that Rashi edited out. Omra mutov tehei shifcha la'uma zu, v'lo tehei gevira la'uma acheres. Better that I should be a servant. As you can see here from the language of the Gemara, that the status of a Pilegesh was the status of a Shifcha. I prefer to be a Shifcha to this nation, right? Because she appreciated the uniqueness of the nation of Yaakov, rather than being a princess in this other nation. But now comes now we're coming to the crunch point of this piece of Gemara. You often find that a piece of Gemara has got like a nice little bit of narrative, and then suddenly goes for the jugular, so to speak. So here the Gemara says, what happened to this woman? Nofak mino Amalek. Her son was Amalek. And who was Amalek, says the Gemara? The Tsa'arinhu li Yisrael, who caused untold damage to Klal Yisrael. Right? And Amalek is the personification of anti-Semitism, of hatred, of genocidal attempts against the Jewish people, chol dor v'dor, in every generation. And he came. So, and now the Gemara almost by the way asks, if you like, the $1 million question: my tama, what was the reason that Amalek developed such hatred for the Jewish people? What does that mean? So the answer is, have a look here, the English translation. What is the reason the Jewish people were punished by suffering the hand of Amalek? It's due to the fact they shouldn't have rejected her when she sought to convert. Right? Lerachek means to push away. they shouldn't have pushed her away. So here you find a very interesting thing. There's a whole hidden story here about a woman who thinks so highly of the Jewish people that she's desperate to join the Jewish people. She wants to convert into the people, and she gets pushed away, right? She then ends up being the mother of Amalek. And that hatred or bitterness that she has against Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, she transmits to her son, and that's how Amalek is born. Amalek is born. This is a piece of Gemara which is quite, I think it's quite shocking in a certain sense, that somewhere along the line, these Chazal are placing the responsibility. We don't know exactly who it was, whether it was Avram or Yitzchak or Yaakov, whoever it was that she went to. We don't even know why they didn't accept her as a Giores, right? But the fact is they didn't, but because they pushed her away, right, this created hatred. In other words, people who want to become close, people who are just not interested in Klal Yisrael, they're not interested, right? I would say most of the non-Jewish world are basically mildly interested in the Jewish people. But what happened here was a woman who desperately wanted, with her might, all her might, that she wanted to join the Jewish people, and she was pushed away, and therefore, and this somehow went sour in her mind and in her heart, and the result of this was Amalek, right? She wanted to come, so he says they couldn't have. So this is the basis of what I'm now doing now is I'm taking this idea one stage further, and I'm learning with you a Gemara here, which actually deals with the founder of Christianity. The founder of Christianity, right? Who, according to our sources, of course, there are all sorts of myths and legends about where Jesus came from, but according to our sources in the Gemara, Jesus was originally a disciple of one of the great Tanoim, So what happens here? Have a look at this Gemara here. This is a Gemara in Sota. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, la'olam tahi small doche v'yamin mekareves. This is a very beautiful line here. A person, la'olam means always. In all situations, one needs to have this balance. Small doche v'yamin mekareves. What does that mean? What does it mean, small doche v'yamin mekareves? Anybody got any interesting translations? What does it mean, small doche v'yamin mekarev? Any offers? Dina.
Mm-hmm. The right hand pushes, the left hand pushes away and the right hand brings close, meaning that you have to chastise someone, but you have to do it in a loving manner and still bring them towards you.
Right. The balance between love and encouragement and warmth on the one hand, right, against criticism and negativity and punishment on the other. Keeping a balance. The truth is this line, small dochim in Makarev, is probably one of the key features, as far as Chazal are concerned, in all matters of human relationships, whether it's parenting or whether it's teachers and disciples or whatever it is. Occasionally one needs to be critical, right? But one measure of criticism has to be balanced out with two measures of love and encouragement, right? And that's the small docher. You push away with your left hand, the left hand being the weaker hand, the yamin mekarev. But with the right hand, you have, in other words, even when it's time to criticize somebody, it has to be done in a way that there is also a loving and encouraging context to it. And getting that balance right is often very difficult. And the Gemara proceeds to give us examples of people who failed to get it right. And one of the examples, interestingly, without going into the whole Gemara about it, is with regards to Jesus in the Gemara, because it is referred to as Yeshu, Yud Shin Vav. So Yeshu was a disciple of Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya, and he misbehaved. And at a certain point, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya kicked him out. right? And the story is that he was sorry, he wanted to be readmitted into the inner circle of the academy of the Tanaim and learning, and they pushed him out. They pushed him out completely. They didn't want to welcome him back in again. And because he wanted to join, and he was rejected, that created in him a hostility and an animosity towards the Jewish people, which played itself out over the last 2,000 years. I don't need to say in which way it played itself out, but certainly Christianity has been probably the main player on in terms of pogroms and inquisitions and anti-Semitism over the years. Have a look at this. So the Gemara says, Loka Elisha shedachva legeichazi b'shtei yodov. Okay, that's a different story in the Tanakh I won't go into for the moment. V'lo, here comes the point with Jesus. V'lo ki Yeshua ben Prachia shedachvoi. Right? So actually, the original text of the Gemara was this word in the square brackets, lahad noitzri, like the Notzrim are the Christians, right? But it was censored, right? The censor in the Middle Ages didn't want any references to Christianity, so this is le'echod mitalmidov. So the censored version of the Talmud replaced the word noitzri with the word echod mitalmidov. He was pushed out b'shtei yodov, with both his hands. Shtei yodov means without any encouragement, without any hope of still being included. So here you find the Gemara is being critical of this Tana, Rabbi Shul ben Prachia, right? So we're dealing with during the last century of the Bayis Sheni, which is, of course, also the period of the origins of Christianity, right? The origins of Christianity were during the second half of the second temple, and during that time, Jesus was somebody who wanted very much to be a Talmid of the Tanaim, who wanted to be a Talmid Chacham, but he was pushed away, and as a result of being pushed away, what happened was a tremendous hatred for Klal Yisrael. And I brought you here Rabbi Shmulevitz and Sichos Musa. It's printed in his in the Sefer, number 85. He has a whole talk about it, which I remember very clearly hearing this talk from Chaim Shmulevitz firsthand, because it was a bit dramatic. You know, I didn't think, sitting in the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim from Chaim Shmulevitz, I'd hear him discuss the origins of Christianity. But what he wanted to say was that there were, of course, there were lots of other elements as well. I'm not saying, he didn't say this was the one and only reason why Christianity developed so anti-Semitically. There were obviously lots of other factors as well. But at a root level, somewhere along the line, here was somebody who very much wanted to be part of Klal Yisrael, but he was pushed away. And he was pushed away too strongly. They failed to fulfill the principle of Samoil Doiche v'Yamin Mekarev. They should have criticized him and maybe suspended him, but then brought him back in with encouragement and shown him the way back. But he was never shown the way back, and he was never encouraged, and he felt that they hated him, and hatred breeds hatred. And this was the Gemara here is saying, and this is Chaim Shmulevitz connected. Chaim Shmulevitz connected the story of Timna and Amalek to the story of the Gemara here with Shul ben Prachia and Jesus, that this was the result of some mismanagement. Now, I'm not coming here to say that I know how to deal with all prospective converts, right? Clearly, some converts are coming in and wish to convert genuinely, and some are not genuine, right? And the Dayan, the job of the Diyanim is to make that decision, and it's an unenviable decision to make about conversion. It's very, very hard, and I don't know if you know, in the army itself, there's a whole program in the army where I think called Nativ. There's a program in the army for boys and girls who are of doubtful Jewish heritage, that they can take out a few months from their army service, and it's counted as part of their army service, and they go through a whole process of tuition and eventually get converted. In other words, the army is using the facilities of Tzahal to help these people get integrated into Klal Yisrael. And the argument nowadays is, look, these people are anyhow going to be living in Israel, mixing with Jewish and intermarrying with Jewish people. If we get a child, if they wish to convert, even if they're only just 10% genuine, let's grab that with both hands and let's hope that that will develop into something later on. The other view is we can't accept converts who are not totally genuine, who are not totally willing to accept every one of the Tariq mitzvahs, believe shalom, and therefore they can't be genuine converts. This is, I want to tell you, this is a debate which has raged through rabbinic life forever. Why is it interesting here? Because in the whole discussion of the origins of Amalek, this is what Chazal identified as the trigger for the hatred of Amalek was the mismanagement of this one woman, Timnah, who wished to convert and was pushed out. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz compared it to Jesus, who wished to be part of Klal Yisrael and was pushed out b'shtei yadayim. The problem is always b'shtei yadayim, meaning the problem is always that the rejection is unrelenting, that it's without any yamin makarev element to it. So there has to be the basis. A child that gets a lot of criticism from a parent or a teacher, which isn't tempered with love and encouragement, will end up with a negative self-image, with very either an angry child or generally a child who doesn't believe in himself, who's been told constantly that he's no good, that he's a bad person, and he'll be damaged. On the other hand, a child who's only given love and affection and never given criticism, it turns out to be a spoiled child who doesn't understand that there are standards that he's held up to certain standards. So the only solution is Samol Doche and Yamin Makarev, getting that balance right. And that should be written over the entrance to every Jewish school and every Jewish yeshiva and seminary, Samol Doche and Yamin Makarev. By all means, give criticism, right? But it has to be tempered. Every one measure of criticism has to be mixed with two measures of encouragement and positivity. That is what Chazal want to teach us in that piece of Gemara there, and that seemingly, and the Gemara says explicitly that was missing in both of these stories, both in the creation of Amalek and in the creation of Christianity. We can identify that this was a factor in the creation of our enemies. And this, I think, is a very sobering thought and something worth, and I want to show you that within Sefer Bereshis, in the subtext of Sefer Bereshis, these ideas already start being formed and start being created. And the net result is that we have Amalek throughout Jewish history, Milchama Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. Okay, I'd like to have a look now at, one second, no, that's not what I want to have a look at the moment. I'd like to have a look at, second, sorry, bear with me. So where is, second, okay, let's have a look at this. This is in Parshas Vayetze. Again, I'm looking, my texts all come from Sefer Bereshis, and I want to show you that hardwired into Sefer Bereshis are certain foundational ideas. Let's have a look at this. So Parshas Vayetze, what's happened in Parshas Vayetze? As we all know, Yaakov goes to the house of Lavan, and there he meets Rachel and Leah and the two shvachos, and he marries them, and his whole family is born. But Rachel is the last one to give birth. Vayizka Elohim es Rachel, Vayishma Elohim, Vayiftach es Rachma. Eventually, Rachel conceives. What happens? V'ata v'teiled ben, v'atoma Aesop Elokim es Cherposi, v'tikra Shemo Yosef. Right? Leima Yosef Hashem li ben Acher, and she davens that this shouldn't be her only child, that she should have a second child, and indeed she does. She has Binyamin as well. So Yosef and Binyamin are the only two B'nai Rachel. This is important for our story that I want to look at. But what's interesting here is this next pasuk. So I want you to understand, it's a bit of big picture for a minute. Why is Yaakov gone to the house of Lavan at all in the first place? Why did he go there? I'm asking a question. Anybody like any offers? Do you remember? What motivated Yaakov to run to the house of Lavan in the first place? Any offers? You have to unmute yourself if you want to give me an answer.
His mother sent him there.
To kill him.
Right. Aesop was going to kill him. Aesop hated him for various reasons, the brachas, the bechira, whatever it was, and Aesop was going to kill him. So for him, going to Lavan's house was a type of a refuge, was an ir miklat, right? He went there to save his life. Okay, bear that in mind. That's the all-important piece of information here. What happens is, Vayhi, so the pasuk says, Vayhi kasha yolda Rachel es Yosef, as soon as Rachel had given birth to Yosef, Vayoma Yaakov Lavan. Yaakov turns round to his host, to Lavan, and he says to him, Shalcheni ve'elcha makomi v'arti. Let me go. I want to go back to my homeland. I don't want to stay here any longer. I've now got children from all my wives. I want to go back. So on the face of it, on a simple pshat level, it seems to be that Rachel is the last one to give birth. If you remember, Yaakov committed himself to 14 years of service in Lavan's house, 7 years for Rachel, 7 years for Leah. And the simple meaning of it is the 14 years are up. That's what some of the Mepharshim here say. And now it's time to go back. What happens actually, just as in parenthesis here, what happens is that Lavan convinces him to stay on another 6 years. And during those 6 years, he becomes wealthy through attaining a lot of sheep and goats, etc., etc. But at this point, he wants to go back, right? But here's an interesting question. How can he want to go back to his house? He knows that Aesop's around, right? He came to Lavan's house in the first place to escape Aesop. How is he going to deal with the original problem? The original problem hasn't gone away, right? Aesop is still there. So why does he want to go back and risk his life, right? So what's going on here in terms of, and apart from which, so Rashi and the Mepharshim and the Gemara is interested in this question, and Rashi says something very interesting. Excuse me. Rashi says that there's an interesting connection here. Look at this pasuk. This pasuk has got two halves to it. One half is Vahikasher Yolda Rachel es Yosef, comma. The first part is that Rachel gives birth to Yosef. And then Yaakov says it's time to go. So what was it about the birth of Yosef that made Yaakov understand that it's time to go? Have a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Kasha Yolda Rachel es Yosef, Mishenolad Sitno Shel Aesop. Mishenolad Sitno Shel Aesop. So the word Soton, we're familiar with the word Soton, the Satan, if you like, is the embodiment of evil. But in Hebrew, really, the word Soton simply means the antithesis. In other words, the opponent, the ultimate enemy, the ultimate opponent who can overcome, who can be the worst enemy possible. So what Rashi is quoting in Chazal by saying, as soon as Yosef is born, Yaakov realizes, so this is already a mystical issue. You have to understand that Yaakov had a Ruach HaKodesh or Nevuah. He knew when he saw that Yosef was born that he was Sitno Shel Aesop. He was the countermeasure against Aesop. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put Aesop and Amalek into this world, and he gave us a countermeasure against it. Where do we see this? Says Rashi, a pasuk in Ovadia, chapter 1. Shenem Avahoya Beis Yaakov Aish. So he's talking about, Ovadia is describing Acharis Hayomim, describing a messianic age. He says at that point, the Jewish people will be like fire. Ubeis Yosef Lahova. And Yosef will be the flame. In other words, the flame is like the intense fire. Ubeis Aesop Lakash. And Aesop and all the house of Aesop, including Amalek, will be like straw. In other words, that the flame of Yosef will be easily able to completely obliterate the straw. Says Rashi, right? Simply having a fire, unless you've got really good flames, you're not going to get very far. Mishanolad Yosef, here comes the punchline of this Rashi. Mishanolad Yosef, as soon as Yosef was born, Botach Yaakov ba'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov understood that he had bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning he saw the birth of Yosef as the gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which v'rotza loshuv, which would enable him to go back. So in other words, according to the way Rashi and Chazal are learning this pasuk, it reads as follows: as soon as Yosef was born, Yaakov had a type of a nevuah or Ruach HaKodesh. He understood that he didn't have anything to fear anymore from Aesop and Amalek. Why not? Because Yosef somehow, even though Yosef was still a baby, but spiritually, Yosef contained the antidote to Amalek. So you have here within Yosef, right? Chazal actually expand this idea in other places because at this point in the narrative, Binyamin isn't born yet. It isn't just Yosef, but it's Yosef and Binyamin. Yosef and Binyamin, both of them have the ability to confront Amalek successfully in the most powerful way possible. That's why, incidentally, we find in Midrashi Chazal that in the Messianic era, B'Yemosa Mashiach, there is Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. These are two different individuals. Mashiach ben David is what we daven every day, as Tzemach David Avdecha Meira Tatzmiach, establishes Torah leadership, establishes Jewish sovereignty, restores the Beis Hamikdash in Eretz Yisrael in the best possible way. That's Mashiach ben David. But Mashiach ben Yosef, what's his job? Mashiach ben Yosef is the Ramat Kal. He is the one who leads the attack against the Amaleks of this world. Because, and this is what we find already in Sefer Bereshis, that when Yosef and later Binyamin are born, they are the counterweight. They are the only people who could really fight successfully against Amalek. And there is a spiritual dimension to this, not just a physical issue. There's a spiritual dimension that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the weapons, if you like, the wherewithal to oppose, to withstand Amalek. So, for example, when was the first battle against Amalek? So that's at the end of Parshas B'Shalach. We had that Kriyas HaTorah in Yerushalayim on Shabbos, right? That's the Purim Kriyas HaTorah. Are the last few psukim of B'Shalach, right? Is the first battle against Amalek. So Moshe Rabbeinu has to fight against Amalek, but he doesn't fight himself. What does he do? He chooses Yeshua. So if you have a look in the Gemara, Chazal say, why does he ask Yeshua to lead the battle against Amalek? At this point, Yeshua was an unknown quantity. Yeshua hadn't played any role in the Jewish people at all, in Mitzrayim or Kriyas Yamsuf at all. But who was Yeshua? He was the Nasi of Ephraim. He was the prince of the tribe of Yosef, And Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if you're fighting Amalek, you need somebody from the tribe of Yosef, right? Similarly, when it comes to Megillas Esther, it's only possible to fight against Haman if you have somebody either from Yosef or Binyamin. And that's why the Megillah makes a big issue out of the fact that Mordechai is Ish Yemini, that he comes from Binyamin, and somehow it's the power of Bnei Rachel. It's the sons of Rachel who are able to overcome Amalek and in some way resolve the hostility and the enmity that exists between Klal Yisrael and Amalek. And that is that. So what's happening here, what I wanted to show you here is that in Sefer Bereshis, both the hatred of Amalek is born and the antidote to the hatred of Amalek is born. Both are already born. They're already, if you like, in the DNA of Jewish history, which will play itself out over the millennia, right? There is Bnei Yosef and Bnei Rachel. So Bnei Yosef and Binyamin, who are Bnei Rachel. The Bnei Rachel have this unique power that they can stand up to Aesop in the fullest way possible. The hatred of Aesop, it's an interesting thing. This Gemara, I think, in some way, the Gemara is almost, I wouldn't say justifying, but is explaining the hatred of Amalek. The hatred of Amalek came from the mismanagement of somebody who wanted to convert and was pushed away. And this is actually quite a sobering story for all Diyanim who are faced with people who genuinely wish to convert, and for some reason they feel they're not suitable candidates for conversion. They know from this piece of Gemara that rejecting a potential candidate is a major decision. Sometimes you have no choice, but it's a major decision because you run the risk that from somebody who wished to be part of the Jewish people, you can create an enemy of the Jewish people. And this Gemara really wants to highlight that in the strongest way possible. So here we have already in Sefer Bereshis this idea. And finally, I just want to finish off the last 2 minutes of the Shia and show you that there's something very fascinating here in the writing of a Megillah. I'm going to do this in the last few minutes of the Shia. I'm assuming that you still have in your mind the sound of Megillas Esther not too far away. So what happens here is, I just want to give you one or two examples. It says here, what does it say in Megillas Esther? That all the king's men and everybody bows down, but Mordechai and Mordechai is refusing to bow down. He won't bow down. And that triggered off the whole problem, right, in Megillas Esther. But and the king's servant said to him, what are you doing? You're driving Haman mad. Haman is a dangerous man. Why don't you do it? And here comes an interesting thing, that it says here, Vayehi ba'omram elov yom yom v'lo shama aleihem. So what is that talking about? The servants of the king are telling Mordechai every day, don't be silly. Bow down to Haman. And they tell him every day, v'lo shama aleihem, and he's not willing to listen to them. Incidentally, there is here a Greek sieve, right? Because in other words, in the Megillah is written Be'omram, but we say Ke'omram. Okay, we'll see in a minute. We'll have a look at that in a minute. Comes along the Medrash. It comes along the Medrash and says, what does it mean? So the Medrash says this phrase. We're focusing on this phrase. Vayehi ka'omram elov yom yom v'lo shama aleihem. That they was telling Mordechai every day, bow down to Haman, and he doesn't listen to them. Says the Medrash, this is exactly the same language that we find in Sefer Bereshis, in Parshas Vayeshev, when Yosef is in the house of Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and Yosef resists. And here the pasuk says as follows. I'm cutting corners here because the last 2 minutes of the Shia. Vayehi kadabra elov yom yom v'lo shama eleho. Exactly the same pasuk in Megillas Esther describing Mordechai exists in Sefer Bereshis describing Yosef. Mordechai is resisting bowing down to Haman, and Yosef is resisting the adultery with Mrs. Potiphar. But the phrase is striking. Kadabra yom yom, she spoke to him every day, v'lo shama eleha, and he refused to listen. And what's interesting is come along Chazal, and they say, in the Medrash Rabbah, Vahi kadabra el Yosef yom yom, Rabbi Yudon b'shem Rabbi Yamin Omar, boneho shel rocha. Right? So the Gemara comes along and says, look, we're talking about the children of Rocha. In one case, it was Yosef, and the other case, it was Mordechai. But they are all B'neihem Shel Rocha. Nisan Shava, Nisan means their test, comes the word Nisayon. Their test was equal, Ugduloson Shava, and their greatness was equal. What do we see? So here the Gemara says, here the Medrash says, Vahi kadabra elav yom yom, Vahi ka'omram elav yom yom. This phrase, this structure of this pasuk is strikingly similar, and it's designed to draw our attention to the similarities between the story in Bereshis of Yosef and the stories of Megillas Esther. What is the similarity here? The similarity is based on this idea that Haman is the, if you like, reincarnation of Amalek and Aesop, and Mordechai is the reincarnation of Yosef and Bnei Rachel, and it's the same battle that's being played out again and again throughout the Tanakh, and the Tanakh gives us a certain biblical view of life that really it's one of the challenges that Klal Yisrael have. The whole door is to deal with the hostility and the enmity of Amalek, and to use the Chochmah. Somehow there's a Chochmah of Bnei Rachel. Maybe we'll speak about that more in the future. I can see my time has run out. I'd like to, that's all I've got time for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this. The insights of Chazal into the origins of Amalek and the insights into the origins of Bnei Rachel, I think, are very fascinating, and it's really a subject for another share in greater depth. I hope you've all enjoyed that, and please God, we will forge ahead. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen.